Hi there, it's that time of the year again when movie companies decide that the best way to put our bums on seats is to sell us the same movie they sold us last year, except put a number on the end of the title. Or sell us the same movie they sold us 5 years ago, except make a woman the killer. Or sell us the same movie they sold us 20 years ago and market the movie at a demographic which reads Smash Hits magazine. And if you understood that joke, then congratulations, you're old. Or sell us the same movie they sold us 40 years ago, except this time market it at people that are collecting a pension. Yep, it's Halloween. And unfortunately for me, I didn't have time due to being pretty ill for quite a long time and also really generally just being very busy. I didn't have time to get myself a Halloween costume. The only thing I could find was this ridiculous and hideous clown mask. That was just a joke. So around this time, every YouTuber and his dog starts to do videos about what the best horror movie is, or maybe they'll do 30 days of Halloween. I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to do anything as tired and cliched as that. I'm going to do something slightly less tired and cliched. I'm going to make a tier list. The only difference between my tier list and other tier lists is that I'm going to go decade by decade over the series of 4 videos from the 70s up until the 2000s. Yeah, up until the 2000s. And rank them all as best I can. Why the 70s, you might ask? Well, my knowledge and experience of movies in general, but in particular horror, begins really in the 70s. Before that, aside from the 20s where my knowledge is really good, it's really patchy in the 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s, so I figured the 70s is the best place to start. So in order to curate these movies, because I can't obviously rank every single movie that was released, so I've picked a selection of movies that were either really popular or landmarks in cinema, the only stipulation being that I had to have seen them, because it seems pretty weird to rank anything without having experience of it. The tiers are as follows. Obviously, the best rank you can possibly get is S, because everyone knows that S is better than A. When did we collectively decide that S was suddenly better? I don't know. Anyway, I've gone with rank S for the god tier movies, really movies that you shouldn't miss and are cinematic masterpieces. Rank A is for movies that are really top of their class. They're really good. You shouldn't miss those either. Rank B is for movies that are, they're pretty good. They're very enjoyable. They're not unmissable, but they're pretty good. Rank C is for incredibly average movies, and rank F is for movies that are a complete fail and you should avoid altogether. Right, are we ready? Let's go. So we'll go decade by decade, since I think that's the best way to give this some semblance of order. And we'll start with 1973 and The Wicker Man.
What is it? What's wrong, sister?
What is that? What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! Oh, my eyes! My eyes!
No, sadly not that Wicker Man. I wish it was that Wicker Man. No, this is Christopher Lee's original. Now here's my thinking behind it. I'm going to put Wicker Man. Wicker Man is going to rank C. And I'm putting it in rank C just because it's really boring for really long periods of time. To be honest, it almost got an F. The only reason it gets rank C is because I'm aware of its significance to cinema, being that it was one of the first movies, if not the first, that featured a really bad ending. And so it carries some cultural significance because of that. Also, Christopher Lee's pretty much awesome and everything. But I couldn't rank it any higher just based on those two things, so rank C it is. Also in 73 is The Exorcist, which is William Friedkin's classic staple of horror. I'm going to put The Exorcist in rank A just because it is a landmark in cinema. It features great performances all around, some excellent visual effects. In addition to that, it shocked audiences at the time because the movie is pretty much intentionally designed to offend anyone who's religious, which in 70s US cinema is not really a great idea. But they did it anyway, and they did it so well that it became a phenomenon. So, rank A. 1974 brings us Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Tobe Hooper's staple of horror. I'm going to be saying that a lot, aren't I? Staple of horror cinema. It's a classic. It's a lot of people's favorite horror film of all time. I'm a huge fan of Tobe Hooper, but unfortunately, I'm not really a huge fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think it does a lot of things really well. There are some incredibly creepy and disturbing scenes. The scene around the dinner table sticks out as a particular creepy scene, but the characters just aren't likable at all. And so, logically, I wasn't really that bothered if they lived or died because I found it difficult to connect to them. It's thin on the ground in terms of writing. That's in terms of plot, in terms of character, in terms of character development. And for those reasons, unfortunately, I am going to rank Texas Chainsaw Massacre B. 75 brings us a movie that literally terrorized most of my childhood and most of my early adulthood too. I had nightmares about it for weekly from the age of 6 when I first saw it, all the way up until about the age of 23, and it still comes back every now and then too. It's a movie that I constantly rewatch, and I've never been disappointed by any time that I've rewatched it. It is, of course, Jaws. Now I know some people are going to be saying, Jaws? That's not scary. It does have some standout jump moments, but the tension and suspense that this movie creates is unlike any other. I've made a whole video about it, but I've just never uploaded it. Maybe I will someday. But in addition to that, horror, we've all been thinking of, well, I won't say all because maybe other people think differently, but I certainly was thinking of horror completely incorrectly in the past. My basic opinion was, is it scary? Okay, it's a good horror. If it's not scary, it's not a good horror. But horror isn't really about scaring people. It's about horrifying. It's really in the title. If the film horrifies you, then it's done its job. Scaring can be a part of that, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that, as we'll find out with some movies in the 80s. And for me, Jaws does a great job of horrifying me all the way through. If you weren't horrified at that scene when Jaws eats the little Kittner kid at the beach, then you are a heartless monster, because it should have horrified you. It's also incredibly well paced, there's great performances throughout, some superb dialogue, and it is the movie that made Steven Spielberg. Without this movie, there might not be a Steven Spielberg. It also created the Hollywood blockbuster. So for me, it's rank S. Can't be anything else. 76 gives us a couple of good movies, and the first one is Carrie. Now I'm going to rank Carrie. I'm going to rank Carrie in rank A, because it carries a lot of significance. It's a movie that helped jumpstart Brian De Palma's career. It's got some great performances. It's got some good visual effects. It's based on a story by Stephen King, and you can't really go wrong with Stephen King stories as long as they're adapted well. And this is one of the better adaptations of a Stephen King property. That being said, this scene in particular,
I can see your dirty pillows. Everyone will.
How can anyone say those lines or hear those lines and not think that it's a comedy? It ruins the tension of the scene. I'm supposed to feel sorry for Carrie in this scene, but I just end up laughing at how ridiculous the mum's speech is. I really hope that religious mums of the world don't really speak this way, because honestly, if I was a child and my parents spoke to me that way, I would just laugh in their face. So it's a bit of a thing that has always annoyed me about the film. I think even the actress that played the role said that she thought that the lines were far too comedic. But I'm still going to put it in rank A because it is a classic. It's a lot of people's favourite horror film, and it's easily one of the better Stephen King adaptations. Also in 76 is The Little Girl That Lives Down the Lane, not to be confused with a lot of other films that feature similar titles. Most people probably haven't even heard of this film, which is why I'm including it in this list, because I really do think people should see it. I can't really tell you very much about it without spoiling the story, which has a lot of twists and turns in it which you probably won't see coming. You might do, but they're still good regardless. They're executed really well. It's got some good performances, and all in all, it's just a very solidly written horror film, which is not something you can say very often about horror. Usually the writing's the thinnest part. But it doesn't rely on cheap jump scares, it just relies on building good atmosphere and tension throughout. So, I'm going to put Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane into rank B. It is slightly above average, but well worth watching. Finally in 76 we have The Omen, which is a story about a child who is so annoying that it makes people kill themselves. Welcome to Parenthood. I mean, all jokes aside, this film fails on a number of fronts for me. It lacks tension. I find it completely unbelievable that you wouldn't just yeet this kid straight out of a window. And it's a shame that the film has such a great score, because of all the movies that I've put in this tier list, with the exception of possibly Jaws, this film has the best score. It's got an incredibly chilling and atmospheric score, which really creates the atmosphere for a lot of scenes. But unfortunately, the plot, the the entire concept for the film is just stupid. Now, if you're going into the films when the kid is older, I can understand the tension there, because an adult has far more agency. The child has none. So it's so ridiculously unbelievable that the events of this movie would happen the way that they do. For me, that's the reason why I'm going to put it in rank C. 77 gives us Wes Craven's classic The Hills Have Eyes. I'm not a huge fan of this film, I'll be totally honest. It's part of a collection of movies around this time that used shocking scenes to generate interest in the film without actually putting much thought into what those shocking scenes are supposed to mean, or how we get to those shocking scenes. And for those reasons, that the writing's very average at best, and I'm really being kind to say that. So for me, The Hills Have Eyes is going to go in rank C. Sorry, Wes. 1978 is probably the best year in the decade of the 70s for horror, primarily because it brings us Halloween, which is the quintessential Halloween movie. If you're not watching Halloween on Halloween, then are you really celebrating Halloween? Its plot is basic, there's no mistake in that, but you shouldn't assume that just because something is basic that it is also bad. There are two ways to make a good movie. You can execute a really clever plot very well, or you can execute a basic plot incredibly well. Both these two things will give you a good movie, and that's something that John Carpenter does in this film. His use of lights and camera, in particular, as well as his score, it all does a really good job of executing what is a basic story, but with at least one likable character in Laurie Strode, and an incredibly chilling villain who is a stand-in for death itself. If you're interested in why I rate this film so highly, because I am going to put it in rank S, then you can watch this video all about how John Carpenter uses lights and camera to create terror in his movies. Also in 78, we have I Spit on Your Grave, which is going to be the first and only movie from the 70s that I put in rank F. This is like The Hills Have Eyes. This is a movie which it leans entirely on its ability to shock you, and it really doesn't give you anything beyond that. The characters are all unlikable. The situation is unlikable. It's a tense movie, there's no denying that, but it's just not a very good movie. Just because something has tension and just because it has something that shocks you doesn't make it a good movie, as we'll see with many others later on. So for me, this is rank F. Also in 78 is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is a remake of an older movie. It is a pretty good remake. It features some good acting throughout. I like the theme behind the movie of using alien invasion as a metaphor for American paranoia in McCarthy-era America about communists hiding within the capitalist structure of America. I like that idea. It's a cool idea. I don't think it is the greatest movie ever made. It's one of the better remakes of this particular film. So for those reasons, I'm going to put it in rank B. The final movie of 78 is Dawn of the Dead, which is George Romero's follow-up to his classic Night of the Living Dead. If I was doing the 60s, I would have put Night of the Living Dead in a rank S, and I don't think I'm doing it a disservice by giving Dawn of the Dead rank A. I don't think it's as good as Night of the Living Dead, but it does play with the same themes. It does it with an equal measure of dexterity, and I think overall it's a good movie with great themes. The only thing that lets us down is some of the acting is a little bit hammy. 1979 gives us a number of good films, some good ones. Sadly, the first one I'm talking about, it isn't really. The first movie I'm talking about from this year isn't really a good movie. Phantasm is a movie which, on surface value, looks like it was supposed to be very good, it's supposed to be scary, but it falls It leans into exploitation territory, but not so much that I think it's a negative. The main problem with it is a lot of the scenes I think are supposed to be crafted to be scary, but end up being funny. And because of that, I can't really rank it that high on a list of Halloween movies. That being said, I don't think it's worthy of a rank F. You shouldn't avoid it. It is an average movie, so if you have the chance, you should probably watch it, but don't feel bad if you miss it, so rank C. Salem's Lot is a fairly classic vampire movie based on a Stephen King novel. I do think it's not a bad adaptation of a Stephen King novel. I think, is it Toby Hooper again? Might be. Can't remember who directed it, but anyway, I think the directing is competent. I think it sounds like an insult when you say competent, but it really isn't, because directing's not easy. So to say that something is competent really is a compliment, but it isn't outstanding in any way. And for those reasons, I am going to put Salem's Lot in rank C. It is only really average. Nosferatu der Nacht, I think I'm pronouncing that right. If I have any German viewers, you can correct me. Is Werner Herzog's remake of the 1920s classic Nosferatu. I'm a huge fan of Nosferatu. I always have been ever since I first saw it when I was about 17 or 18. I think it uses camera, lighting, and silent performance to create a lot of tension and a really creepy atmosphere. So to see someone do such a great job of a remake as Werner Herzog does is really nice. It's nice for me to be able to say that one of my favourite movies got remade and it was done brilliantly. Nothing I can say bad about this movie. That being said, I don't think it's worthy of rank S. It's not a god tier, but it is a movie you should definitely see, so this is going to get rank A. The second to last movie I'm going to talk about from 1979, and in general, is the Amityville Horror, which is a movie that a lot of people are familiar with, a lot of people like, but I just find the pacing is very slow. It takes a long time for it to get going. When it does get going, it stops and starts quite a lot, and it doesn't really give you a chance to enjoy any of the real scares, and the scares themselves aren't really all that scary. In addition to that, none of the performances are outstanding or bad, they're just average, and the characters really aren't likable. I think what's interesting about the Ryan Reynolds remake, which came out years later, is Ryan Reynolds actually managed to make a character that really wasn't all that likable in the first movie or in the story in general likable. That's probably down to his natural charisma, but I think the remake is better than the original, and for that reason I'm going to put it in rank C. The final movie of 1979 is Ridley Scott's Alien. Now I know some people might be sat there thinking, well, this isn't really a horror, this is science fiction, but it is. It's absolutely a horror. It has all the hallmarks of a horror movie. It is horror painted on the canvas of science fiction. It does a great job of creating tension and fear and suspense. It is an incredibly creepy setting. It's isolated. Everything about it screams horror, and it does it incredibly well. In addition to that, it has a cast of characters, all of whom are likable, relatable, and very grounded 3D characters. None of them are, stereotypes. They all avoid stereotypes incredibly well. I've always been a big fan of Dan O'Bannon's original script for this movie because of how he writes the characters. In his original script, he intended for every single character to be gender neutral. Not that they didn't have a gender, but he intended that they could be assigned to either a male or a female actor. And I think that shows in his writing because he did that, he largely avoids any of the tropes or stereotypes of writing female characters in horror. And in the process, creates one of the greatest cinema characters of all time, Ellen Ripley. The quality of acting is superb from every single actor all the way through the movie. Like I said, it's brilliantly paced, and it is, in places, a scary film. It's certainly a film that I imagine would have been terrifying when it came out in 1979. And so for all those reasons, Alien goes in at rank S. That's it for the 1970s. What did you think of my tier list? Is there something that I missed that you think should be included? Is there something that I put in that you wouldn't have put in? This series of videos is designed to generate conversation between us all, and because I think it's fun to put things into tier lists. So, tell me what you would do differently. That being said, I'll see you in the 80s.